Welcome to 10,000 Tacos, everyone. This is a show about the taco life. Each week, we bring you conversations and perspectives connected to the tortilla culture. We tell you about taqueros, molineros, tamaleros, as well as scholars and journalists who help us understand and see Mexican food beyond the plate. I am Isidro Salas, along with Jose Ralat. Today,
we have a very special guest, someone who knows, like we've said many times, tacos are bigger than us. That person would be Steven Alvarez, a poet and professor at St. John's University in Queens, New York. Alvarez hails from the small mining town of Safford in southeastern Arizona. He's the first in his family to graduate college and to get a PhD. Despite gaining entry into the ivory tower of academia, Alvarez has not forgotten where he comes from. Rather, it's reinforced it, and he's embraced the Latino ideal of ni de aquí, ni de allá, from neither here nor there. It's visible in his academic work of literacy, of immigrant and Latino children, where language might not be the barrier we think it is. It's also visible in his poetry, which is lyrical, narrative, and moves across the page as if E.E. Cummings and Ezra Pound decided late in their literary careers to become painters and architects. Letters and words jump into linguistic puddles across the page. Some characters are like the craggy landscapes of the Southwest. Through these avenues, Alvarez can be seen for what he is, a relentless explorer with tireless curiosity. That curiosity led him to teach the first of its kind course, taco literacy, public advocacy, and Mexican food in the U.S. Nuevo South at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. I read about it back in January 2016 when my friend Javier Cabral featured Alvarez in a story. The story made Alvarez almost an overnight taco celebrity because who wouldn't want to take a college level class on tacos? I even tried to audit it. Alvarez eventually moved back to Queens, where he also did grad school work. He's taught a version of the taco literacy course a couple of times. He even used my book, American Tacos. The class was and is more than a history and food studies course, though. It's an interactive experience that requires students to create social media accounts to track their education in the class and in the field. There's a blog. They have to apply their own upbringings and cultures in the coursework, which includes field trips, because you can't talk about tacos without eating them, right? This is where literacy comes into play. Alvarez is a literacy scholar who walks the line through his academic books, including Brokering Tareas, and in real life applications, not just in tacos, but also in his poetry, such as the books Codex Mojaodicus. He's going to have to correct me on that. When we get to him, his work doesn't differentiate between English and Spanish, nor is it, as previously mentioned, constrained to convention when it comes to layout, much less narrative. It's kind of like a mestizaje, typographically and literally. Steven always keeps me thinking. I am proud to call him my friend. Before we move on, though, I'd like to introduce my compadre de otro madre, proud son of a taquero, Isidro Salas. ¿Qué pasa, Isidro?
Buenos dias, Jose. Buenos dias. Thank you, man. I'm sort of geeking out here because just a quick story. When I started to podcast about my experience, my taco truck experience, there were two people that I wanted to meet. One is you, right? And the other was Steven Alvarez, you know? So I followed his profiles. He has multiple profiles. Please follow him as well. And I'd follow his posts. And I was always elated, especially when he would kind of like my posts. I geeked out, right? Anyway, today proves that the taco gods will do what they want to do. But they always have a way to pair the tortillas and the people who think alike. That's what I want to believe. And that is happening today. We're having Steven Alvarez with the show. I'm geeking out.
Well, first off, just thank you everybody for having me here, Jose. That was really touching. That's probably the best introduction I ever have. Of course, it's like has to come from my buddy, but he actually this is really exciting for me because he actually read my stuff. All right, that's a hug right there. Un abrazo, cabrón. No mames. Oh, but by the way, I'm not supposed to say bad words, right?
That's
It's okay. Because I was gonna say like whoever you're introducing, that was a bad mother effer. But anyway, so I'm just happy to be here, y'all. Well, I get excited talking about this stuff, and then well, I just feel like I'm with my people here. I've never done this thing before, so if I mess up, my apologies.
No apologies needed, man.
All right.
Yeah. So, and again, I preface this in 2017, sometime in 2017, I was in New York with my wife. I can't remember what hotel it was, but it was off like 56th and 6th Avenue. And when we walked out of the hotel, the street was closed, the avenue part. I don't know if it was Broadway. Broadway and 6th are the same, aren't they?
I think so. I think they turned into it. Yeah, Avenues of America. Somewhere, yeah.
And so we walk out and the streets are closed off to auto traffic. So I'm like, oh, yes, there's like a street fair going on and it's stretching from blocks. And so there's a lot of stands out there. There's a lot of people. And the first thing I noticed was this taco stand. And I see, and I'm of course attracted to it because I'm like, I want to go to this taco stand, right? And the people working, they're wearing the national El Tri's jerseys, right, with la Selección de Mexico. And I'm like, this has got to be good. So I order the tacos, and I'm like, these are real tacos, right? I'm from California. I'm like, these are real tacos. You know, Taco Bell stuff. This is the real stuff. And it surprised me that existed there in New York. So after reading the first few chapters of your book, it became really evident to me that there was a market there of, a taco market in New York. And it did surprise me. The first question is, tell us more about the Mexican population in New York.
Well, sure. Well, first off, your story kind of reminds me of why I love this city, because you see those street fairs and you'll see just the whole world, right? And I say Midtown Manhattan is one thing, where I live in Queens, even more so. And there's still those kind of street fairs. And for me, I'm from Southeast Arizona. My town is pretty much where I grew up, the exact opposite of New York City. That's one of the reasons why I live. It's also very far away. The weather here sucks, but whatever. And for me, though, when I came here, that's when I started learning more about my Mexican identity, but in relationship to what it meant to be from Norteño, to meet a lot of folks who are Poblano. And so there was already a sizable Mexican population when I arrived about 2005. And so to see folks participating in street fairs is one thing, but because there was such a big migration of folks, mostly from the area called the Mixteca. So that encompasses Guerrero, Puebla, and Oaxaca. So a lot of folks who are coming from, sometimes from subsistence farming backgrounds in some of the little small areas, and way out in the rancho and stuff like this, in montañas. And so anyway, well, for me, it's just very different. The foodways were different. The frijoles were the first ones I noticed were different, because they didn't use the pinto beans. And I was like, all right. And also finding flour tortillas was tough for me. I know, Jose, you had a kind of similar experience like finding your flour tortillas at some of the Chinese fast food places that were doing Mexican food, which already tells you the market for Mexican food was already here before Mexicanos really made a presence. Right?
Yeah.
It goes back historically, because actually this guy, Vencio Maldonado, was one of the first people to form the patent. He was here in New York City. He actually grew up not too far from here in Jackson Heights. He had his house. He was one of the ones who did the first patent for the frying to make the U-shaped corn tortillas. So there's a long history in New York City, but when is when things changed.
I think it's really important to let people know that happened way back in 1947.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? That's how long the history is. But continue, please.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, so the history was already there, but, maybe about 40 years later was when more Mexicanos really started. I mean, so the Maldonados were one family here, but not as prevalent as you could think, like Puerto Rican folks and later on Dominican folks, Ecuadorian folks, later on Colombian. I mean, folks from all over Latin America. But Mexicanos were not really here in the way that we are, like in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, U.S. Southwest. Around the mid 90s, though, is when other places, like where I used to live in Kentucky, same thing. I moved there. I was like, all right. All of a sudden, it was puros Mexicanos. And so much so that Lexington, people call it Mexington, and the
Yeah.
Mario over there.
Yeah.
Who over there? And so anyway, it wasn't that. It was Atlanta. It was Georgia, the Carolinas, both. It's the Midwest, like the upper Midwest, North Dakota, South Dakota. All of a sudden, these places are becoming more Mexicanized, Latin American, but especially Mexicanized. And so with that, what you said is one thing, is that when the people show up, we want our food. And this is where you start getting some of the first moguls of the community, or the people that supply tortillas and some of the food. And so this guy, Jaime Lucero, was one good example of a really good businessman here in New York who was making tortillas. And so when Mexicanos start arriving, we want our tortillas. And if we can get our tortillas here, fresh, and somebody's got the industrious spirit, they're probably going to do okay. Big supermarkets are also the same. At any rate, that pattern I saw in Kentucky happens here. I think it happens for each particular group. It's sort of like the spending that comes within the group to build the group up, but sometimes how it gets redistributed, well, that's a whole other subject, I guess.
Yeah.
But for me, I guess the biggest wonder and what I love about this city is that on one hand there was the relatively new Mexican population, hadn't been there for, let's say, centuries, but now we have folks who are like, we are New York Mexicanos.
Yeah.
Like, that's a thing. You know what I mean? And even that, so that translates into like a New York Mexican foodways too. Still developing. Take a lot of credit what we can from like Texas, California, or wherever, but also a really heavy presence that comes from southern Mexico. So
in that region you spoke about, and you highlight that in the study of your book, that region of Mexico is influencing the tacos there.
I mean, it's always about the people first. It's what the people do. But also put it this way, it's when you live in New York, you bring your foodways, but your foodways are also impacted by everybody around you by virtue of just the sheer diversity of the city. So things do change. The things that sometimes change for Mexican food in New York, though, are like how to sometimes market it for a quote-unquote mainstream, so-called. Although there's more people these days who want to have what they think is the authentic experience. And I think we can debate what all that stuff is, but usually authentic means they want brown people who don't speak English serving them. And to go into parts of the neighborhood where they would never live. They would never live there. They'll go in there and parachute in the daytime, but they would never live there. You see what I'm saying? That's where I live. And that's where I love.
Yeah.
Dignity first of the people, right? And to understand, like, you can't love the food if you don't love us. That's just the bottom line.
So I moved from Sunset Park, Brooklyn, to Dallas because I have a Tejana wife. And the one thing I noticed was, first of all, it was best of both worlds because it was Puerto Rican and Mexicanizing neighborhood. There was a little tension. I was able to find puestos on the side of bodegas. For those who don't know, a puesto is a taco stand or cart. And I'd get my $2 barbacoa de borrego and just keep walking. And I would hit 5 Mexican places, right? And they have them in the back of bodegas too, where you get huge tortas, right? And with all these Mexican influences, and with the Mexicans coming more and more, settling, integrating into communities that aren't necessarily Mexican, but pan-Latin American. And then you have old holdouts. Do you think that there is a distinct Mexican accent?
Well, yeah. I mean, first off, like in the same way that it's kind of a bit more complicated than this. Because accents are always complicated, especially when people think they don't have an accent. Because that's the idea, like, oh, I speak the accentless, whatever, English or Spanish, because they both have that kind of idea. Usually as Castellano is going to be like what we think of British English, but not even British English, because there's some people in Britain who are like considered like West Virginia, so-called. Usually people who work in coal mines, actually, so as it is. People who do blue-collar work, people who are poor, you are stigmatized, and your language is too. So is your food. You see what I'm saying? And so, yeah, there are various classes of Mexican Spanish spoken in here in New York City, because there are people who are professors. There are people who, for whatever reason, try to affect the Castellano kind of Spanish to sound educated, so-called proper Spanish. There's a Spanish of the street that might even be, as you say, the larger influence are going to be the resonance of Puerto Rican Spanish, because that's been here a long time. So that kind of has a little bit different status attached to it. Even though reggaeton, for example, might have like a negative status attached to it in terms of like relationship to standard Spanish, Castellano, or even any kind of music, it's the kind of language that's popular. It's that accent that's popular and has more status among youth. And it's very poetic. It's beautiful. And sometimes it mixes things too. And so the way I would put it is that there's actually scholars who look at New York Spanish. So it's the Spanish of New York that kind of, in the same way, like there is I don't know if you think of like any kind of Texas English, it has to kind of coalesce and have features that might be related to it, and the various kind of the variables, let's just say. So in some ways, it was like New York Spanish is actually looking more like English. It's kind of a little bit more pochoized, Englishized a little bit. And that kind of happens because you can think like, a lot of Puerto Rican folks, you live here for a while, you speak English and Spanish together. Like you parquear, your car, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And so, but then at that point, that becomes kind of normal. And so anyway, though, it's interesting, and this, even more so when I lived in Kentucky, is when I started seeing this. But I started realizing this in New York, because where I was at was some of the outer boroughs, and so people spoke a little bit different there. When they spoke English, it sounded like some of the kids in the neighborhood, which sometimes was African American English as well. But when they spoke Spanish, puro Poblano, like it was a Poblano accent. So I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So they maintained the Poblano, but the English one that's around them is what they developed. So they actually have that duality. When I went to Kentucky, in Kentucky, there's a lot of Mexicanos, y'all, who were like born and bred in Kentucky. So, in Kentucky, there is Appalachia. So there are Mexicanos in Appalachia. Those are some of my friends call them Appalachicanos. Right? When they speak in English, they have the accented English, right? So, for example, the word plate is pronounced plight. Plight, for example, right? And so I was also the academic, I guess I was the faculty advisor for a Latinx student union we had at University of Kentucky. Mostly Mexicanos, but some of the students would be coming from the holler, from Eastern Kentucky, right? Anyway, one time we had an event, tacos, of course, and I was busy over here talking and trying to arrange some other stuff, and the student came over and she's like, "Professor, you want a plight?" I didn't expect it to come out of her face, like out of her face and her mouth, right? And then she started speaking in Spanish, and her family's from Jalisco. And I was like, oh, that was Jalisco. That one I got right there. And that one matches what I assumed I was supposed to hear from you. But the English that came out, I was like, whoa. But to turn this around, some of the times when I would bring in aspects of accent and power and stereotyping, the white students from Appalachia, they get it. They understand what it's like to have people judge you before when you speak.
That's so
they
interesting.
Understand what it's like to censor yourself in class because you're afraid everyone's going to laugh at you the way you talk. So that kind of sense was sometimes, I think, when we think about the politics of language, it's really interesting because sometimes it divides us. But more importantly, it's like, I don't know, there's aspects where you can see some beautiful things too, because like, in the same way, like that student I was saying that she speaks like a stigmatized English, she's still bilingual. She can do some really cool stuff, and she's in college too. So it's just really unique to me. And so I guess the New York English then is kind of like what folks would speak, but sometimes their Spanish might still have some regional variations.
In your book, you mentioned a couple of things. The Mexican accent, people get treated differently there. And I also remember reading a section where you were talking about that one of the parents that participated in the Manos program, that she came from California and that her brother was already there in New York, and that he said, why don't you come here? You get treated better here than you do in California. And that struck me because I grew up in California. And as much as I want to defend California, I'm like, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of true. And a lot of people don't talk about how we treat la raza here, the people that pick the fruits and stuff. And then it just got me thinking, get to New York, I read a section that says the Mexican accent, that some people get treated if you're Mexican, get treated more like poorly. I don't know if that's the right word, but do you think that tacos change that perception, or can tacos change that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. There's a couple things there. One is that in that particular case, that was like a family that was living, basically across the continent, and they're both outside of Mexico, but they sort of really needed each other. And she was weighing her life there in California, and also the kind of jobs that were available and the standard of living and things versus how he was doing pretty okay over here, working in the restaurant industry,
Yeah.
actually. And so in this way, he was saying, like, look, I mean, life isn't going to be easy anywhere. Plus the weather sucks. But look, here's what I've got going on over here. And because it's New York City, it's a little bit more welcoming to immigrants. Not New York State, mind you.
Yeah.
The New York State is some of the rest of New York State's like Alabama. It's kind of wild.
Albany, Alabama.
Yeah, no kidding. And like Pennsylvania, pretty. I won't even go into those guys. But anyway, so like in the city, of course, it's a little bit different, a little bit more welcoming. And so, especially in some of the industries where so-called people don't want to work, or for example, those industries that are heavy in the service sector. So going to a pizza place, any pizza place in New York City, you're probably going to see a Mexicano, if not somebody now from Central America. Most of the restaurants in the back as well. Now, to kind of bring that up to for why New York City is kind of interesting because a lot of immigrant folks, they're maybe removed from the immigrant generation, but they still carry a kind of nostalgia that they can kind of see that story in the Statue of Liberty or whatever. But we've been coming here for a long time. But regardless, whatever, that sometimes you get a little bit of a fair shake for all that mythology that New York carried. But there's a lot of racism and stuff. I'm not even going to try to make it seem like it's great in that way. But I will say this: when it comes to the food, oh, they love our food. I mean, who doesn't, right? They love our food. And this is interesting because sometimes New Yorkers, they came with the stereotype taco. I'm talking about the American taco, the U.S. taco, like the whatever, the mass-produced hard shell taco, whatever. That was the idea they had. They come to find Mexican food made by poblanos in New York, and they're like, the food in New York City is no good. I don't like this. You can't
Get a
get
rope.
tacos in New York. All right, when you're also saying that, you're also saying that we're not good. What, like, we're here. So you say you can't get good Mexican food? What? 'Cause we're lower class Mexicans? Like, what is that? Like, we have food, but just because you haven't discovered it yet, that's on you, buddy. Right? It's not because there's bad food, because there ain't no bad Mexicans either. Even though the guy that came down the escalator number 45, the very first thing he says, take your pick, right?
Yeah.
They're bringing drugs, they're rapists, and some of them, I assume, are good people, right? He assumes, right? Even he loves his taco bowl. Right? What I'm saying is that this way that oftentimes is that what, for example, when people are going to humanize us because we've been systematically dehumanized for a long time. Sometimes it is through the food. Although sometimes the problem is that because the food has been decontextualized, Americans for a long time have been trying to get our food but remove us from our food. Whether that meant putting Mexican food in cans, whether that meant like making Mexican fast food as mass produced, so you don't have to see the Mexicans doing the work. Go down the line when it goes to the labor sector in terms of like the people in the fields that nobody sees working, doing the assembly line kind of work. For a long time, it's like, do I really understand that our humanity is really what's at stake? And at that part, when you start to see this, you can see, like, for example, the policies of breaking up families, why that is so heinous and disgusting, because this country has tried to break apart families before, because if you break apart a family, you break a people. But the bonds that bring us together, historically, too, have been our food. It's the thing that makes us stronger. It's how we show we care, but it's also our part of our resilience. So they can recognize that we haven't gone anywhere because our food keeps growing. And they keep wanting to learn more about it. And hopefully, once they learn more about the food, they start to see us as human beings. Because, like I said before, once you appreciate who we are as your neighbors and the long history you've had, the food tastes so much better. And you can appreciate why it should bring us together, because we all eat, y'all. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is something we should also celebrate and learn from together.
So you brought up regionality a lot within that answer. And New York Mexican is predominantly poblano. And what strikes me is that the taco placero is really just the guisado, right? It's another name for the same thing. And in the past, you have said that particularly the chile relleno taco is a very New York thing now. Do you think, as with other regions, that there is a developing codifying
Oh, yeah.
New York Mexican.
Yeah, no, that's great. I actually, with the Taco Placero, and I hope y'all ever have a chance to come to New York, but especially you got to go to like maybe Queens or Sunset Park, probably the Bronx. I mean, whatever, y'all. Go to Manhattan if you have to. Just kidding. Manhattan's pretty badass, but definitely come in the outer boroughs, y'all. And because especially in Queens and Brooklyn, where Jose was talking about, the Mexican barrios are spread out. There is no one Mexican barrio. So if you go to the Mexican barrios, is when you get to hang out with the gente and you hear Spanish and seeing all the you'll feel like, for those of you who been to the barrio, you're like, oh, this is the barrio. Here I am. I like this. I feel okay.
Real quick, Corona is in Queens.
Oh yeah. So that's part of the barrio. Oh yeah, for sure.
I've been there. I went. That's one of my first places I went. First time I went to New York, I'm like, cool. Manhattan's cool, but I want to see where the gente is. And look, coming from California, where everything's more spread out, and you see everything so condensed, it was almost like I grew up in Mexico for 6 years of my life, but you go to these little mercados where everything's condensed. That's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, it reminds me of Mexico City underneath the 7 train, because the 7 train has a whole world on it. And if you go to the very end of the 7 train, is one of the biggest Chinatowns on the East Coast. And right there, Corona is like Latin American Central, just a few stops away. And you keep going down, there's Little India. I mean, this is like, I love this place. But you're right. So that area in the barrio, you're going to find, like, for example, if you go to some of these little taquerias, well, I say a little taqueria, but you want to get a taco placer. Like, they're big, which is like what people think about a New York pizza. Because a New York, anywhere else, maybe there's a slice, but you're like, oh, New York slice, it's like big. You have to fold. You have to
like a Costco pizza?
No. Yeah, but you got to make it to a taco. You have to eat a side, people are going to laugh. And my friend Robert Sietzema, he's an editor for Eater. He was explaining a little bit about the history, but he's had like a wave of Italian migrants, a lot of street food. When it started making pizza, it was kind of like you had to compete with everybody else, and then the pizza started getting bigger and bigger until whatever. So, anyway, so he was pointing out that, and I was like, well, maybe this taco placero thing is very similar. So he started doing like a little bit of research. It's like, yeah, they're getting gigantic, y'all. I mean, these things become pretty much a meal at some point. I think they're a little bit more expensive, but for example, the one that's been pretty popular is to get the whole chile relleno on top of like a better rice and jalapeno, sometimes a hard-boiled egg as well, and a big tortilla. But it usually has to be held by a box because it really can't be held on it. So
yeah, that would be my favorite taco.
You're gonna help us a little later on. You're gonna help us resolve a dispute Jose and I have. But it's a little later. We'll save it for the end of the show.
I mean, like, this is kind of one where it's like, it's the kind of one woman that was Taquera was explaining to me, like, this is the one that the guys get when they come home from work. It's like a whole meal right there. They can get it in the box. They can just go, vamos, eh? But for me, I guess the one thing I would say about what's going on in New York right now is like the most popular thing right now that's happening is mariscos. Ooh. And also like birria. That's the one that's coming from Tijuana style. That is becoming a part of like Mexican foodways, even though it's got like this really interesting trajectory, but it's made by poblanos. But they understand the market because birria is everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere already, but it is everywhere here. Kind of,
put that shit in a chile.
I mean, it's so interesting that this is what folks have gotten, because I know birria has been here for a long time, like even beef birria, this kind of style, And then I think that, I don't know, it's sort of part of where I think social media plays a big part. What looks good, what looks delicious, what's shareable. I mean, it was the consomme that was like dripping, that I guess, the red tacos. I don't even know if we call them red tacos anymore. That's the thing. I don't know.
Now you're getting into the whole like Anglo-driven trend.
But it is. Yeah. And that's what drives the trends here too.
Yeah,
though, I think.
Yeah. And that's that'd be an interesting talk for perhaps we'd love to have another time with you, because that is an interesting big point, like social media and who's spreading it, right? You and we have some followers and we post some good stuff, but somebody else posts it with I don't know what to say, lighter skin or whatever, and it just blows out crazy, right? And I don't know if there's a taco justice or injustice from that, but that's an interesting point, man.
I mean, I guess if the taco, this is like where some folks will make some of the arguments about Glenn Bell. We won't go there, but like he popularized Mexican food so more people could have Mexican food, but at what expense? Through appropriation. And
I wouldn't have a job.
Well, so I mean,
yes, you would.
This guy, it. I mean, but also it's like he gives us stuff to be able to speak back to as well. And so, it's kind of complicated because we're like, great, you may not be the best person to be the ambassador of a taco.
Yeah.
You could get a Mexican. I'm just saying, but at least you're getting the word out. So maybe they're going to come back to me someday. I don't know.
One of our friends who's joining us, Rodrigo, he has mentioned that's an opportunity for him to educate people, to tell them, hey, and he gave an example of Chipotle, right? Of people, his friends, like, oh, Chipotle. He's like, well, let me show you some. So I guess in that case, maybe,
Yeah.
but
I mean, that's kind of where you guys come in.
we try.
Both of you do this because I feel like y'all do it on one hand, like highlighting different people, but also bringing in some of the bigger issues and not just this is yummy or whatever, right? Go eat this, it looks good, but like some of the bigger stuff is really important.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. We talk about it a lot. Sometimes we lose listeners because they just want to talk about the food, but we talk about the social issues underneath. The hidden ingredients, the feel good stories. Jose gets in there, man. He goes into I've seen him firsthand. I traveled with him. We're actually going to be in Houston this weekend, but I've seen him like hand out his card and ask the taquero, "Can I talk to you about this?" And sometimes, I'm sure he gets a lot of no's, especially when they have a Hitler mustache. That's a different story.
You saw that. Tell him that
No,
story.
we were in the store, and this guy, dueño and kind of older gentleman, and he's looking at Jose's offering him the card, and when you have time, because he was busy, but he has this mustache that he has a Hitler mustache. We're like, oh.
This is all in Spanish, and then he just keeps looking at me like, huh? And I can't. I'm about to crack up laughing.
That to me is probably going to be a sign. Then I'm like, I don't know if I should be eating these tacos either.
Oh, they were terrible too.
Yeah, they need a cilantro in their life. Real quick reset on this. We're talking to Professor Steven Alvarez of St. John's University in Queens, and we're not just talking about tacos. We're talking about the cultura.
Well, yeah. So you teach your students to learn about the culture by reading tacos, just like anything is a text, right? And so you can say things about the people who made those tacos, where they come from, what's going on, what's the cross-cultural connections. Cilantro is not Mexican. It's from Asia and from the Middle East. Trade brought that in.
No, it is
Limes. Oh my God. Limes are not Mexican.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Everything is Mexican, Jose.
I want to know, if limes are 88% water, why is it so freaking hard to get any juice out of a key lime? I'm sorry. I just had a moment. So sorry. But, Steven, can you read the absence of tacos?
What do you mean? Like if a taco does not exist?
Yeah. If a taco doesn't exist within a space.
That's not a world I want to live in, my friend.
Okay, so the answer is yes. All right.
Put it this way. Well, it's kind of like turning it a little bit around, but like, you mentioned before, it was like I'm the first one in my family to go to college and then get a PhD and stuff. You want to talk about the absence of Mexican people? The higher I got. So I remember like going to places and I would look around and I was like, well, I guess I'm the only Mexican here again, besides the people that work there. And usually I would go talk to the folks that are working or whatever, like I was at a conference and things like this. But I don't know, that kind of usually when in those kind of situations, like when I go turn to the food, to go find the food, to go find my people, because sometimes it was just very strange when I noticed those times I would tell some of my classmates who were not Mexicanos, not even Latinos, go to like a restaurant, like, well, there are no more Mexicans in here. They're all in the back. I can hear the music. And they're like, why do you always bring that up? Why do you always point out where all the Mexicans are all the time? I'm like, well, like, I don't know. I want to see. They just thought it was kind of strange. Like I would keep bringing that up. And then after a while, I started thinking, well, maybe I better not be saying that in front of white people. I think it makes them uncomfortable. But then I'm like, it makes them uncomfortable. I'm always going to bring it up.
It's really nice to see people squirm sometimes.
The white folks, though, especially, and part of it is kind of like sometimes to deny that they see inequality that's right. Sometimes, not just white folks in general, but sometimes people who are not unable to see inequality that exists in front of them. And for me, it was like, for being someone who was not supposed to be there in some ways, it was always glaring, even though I wouldn't say things like that. So The absence of a taco for me is like usually means the absence of a Mexican is implied. So I like that is a world I don't want to live in.
That's deep. Yeah. No, and it's interesting about the uncomfortable. My wife and I went to go visit some friends. This is when we still lived in California, and my wife's coworker, she said, "Hey, we should introduce the husbands." And yeah, I love going on the water. I love doing the wakeboarding and being out in the lake boat, right? And her husband had that, so he's like, "Yeah, yeah." So we go and meet, and the first question he asks is if I was illegal. That's what he said. And he's like, he's apprehensive, but going, "Are you illegal?" And I'm going, I'm gonna fuck with him. You mean illegal, right? and I'm like, no. And his eyes like, you're joking. I'm like, and then my wife's from Scotland. And I go to the restroom, and as I'm coming back, I'm hearing him tell her, you're the kind of immigrants that we want."
Oh.
And my wife's like, "I'm not an immigrant. I'm here to work. Like I got." So it's weird. Like the uncomfortable. They're nice people. They're not. Some are nice people, but the ignorance sometimes gets you, right. And I'm hearing from you that it's in Kentucky, that's in New York, and other places that this thing still exists. And the tacos is what makes everything better.
I mean, it helps. The tacos. Tacos don't heal all wounds, my friend. I wish that was the case.
The salsa does.
We throw that taco. That's all right. Yeah, well, yeah, literally.
Tortillas do. With a little salt, butter.
Yeah, that's right. But it's even my hometown where I grew up is on Arizona. That's the border. Half the town was Mexican American, Chicano. Like they teach us to hate ourselves. That's what they do. They teach us in the school. They try to take away books that are about us. They say those books are dangerous because maybe we're going to read that we're human beings. We might question why they've been treating us this way. The history's there. Like they lynched us in Texas. They lynched us in Arizona. They lynched us in New Mexico. Let alone like what happened to the indigenous people, and it's still continuing to happen. And so for me, I remember growing up in Arizona, and like half the town is Mexican American, but none of my teachers were. They're all white folk. The people that worked in the cafeteria, my mom was a school bus driver for a little while. People who were like teachers' aide, they were brown, always brown, pretty much guaranteed. But the people who were teaching never had a Mexican American principal while I was there. And so for me, I remember like, let alone being able to read books by like people who were Chicano. Then I went to college at University of Arizona, and all of a sudden it was like, there's Mexican American studies. I'm like, wait, what? Wait, wow. I was thinking like, wow, there's a whole group of people who would just study us, because usually I thought we weren't even worthy of study. And so for college, for me, it was really eye-opening because I had to realize I had to deprogram all that stuff that taught me I wasn't worth shit, and that my people were here. And how I found out one way was like through the food, even back then. That's when I was always learning. When I was growing up in a little town in Arizona, and then I got to have more food from Tucson, from different areas in Sonora and Sinaloa and stuff. So that's where my education. I wish I would have had taco literacy when I was an undergrad. Where was I when I was an undergrad? I was an undergrad.
So you started that at the university, taco literacies, or has that been prior to you?
No, I mean, that's what I started. But I was thinking, though, that for me, actually, when I was living in Tucson from the big city, bigger city, and there was a South Tucson, a big barrio, and there was different food that was not like where I grew up. Because the food where I grew up was more like maybe El Paso style, but more like the Tex-Mex kind of style. A little bit of New Mexico because it had green chili, but it was a little bit different. The tacos were not going to be like the kind on a flour tortilla with cilantro.
Those aren't real tacos. Those aren't real tacos.
But it was more like going to be the hard shell tacos dorados. That's what we always had growing up.
Yes.
And so anyway, going to having Sonora and carne asada, like on flour tortillas, and like that was all burritos. That was just meat. That's all it was, and the hot dogs and all this kind of stuff. That's when I started learning more about my people and being proud, because I started seeing like this stuff is really good. Like this, it's not just because I saw that the food was good. I was also learning more Spanish. I was learning more about norteños, but I said norteño because that was something that was kind of not really part of my upbringing, unfortunately. And then, well, to move even further, I think it was for me a very important and impactful way to start thinking about who I was through the food. So that exploration that was individual with me was learning about more about my family and my history through the food, asking questions, and it branched out to all different kind of ways. And I still think that's impactful because even for the students who are not Mexican in my classes, I always ask them to think back about the trajectory of their life through food and the learning that they gain, the teaching that they've done, but try to bring it back to some kind of aspect of ancestry because that's gifts. And the food that we learn from and the people who feed us are the same ones who love us and care for us. And usually they're the same ones that taught us how to read.
Yeah.
So these things are all kind of brought together with I think aspects of care and common aspects of humanity. So, on one hand, to read a taco is one thing, but, and to really think about the relationships that go into making any single taco, of all the people and all the hands that have to touch everything and get you that taco to your mouth, is pretty complicated.
Okay, well then I have the most important question of the day. Are burritos tacos?
Oh man, this one is
Take your time.
Well,
but it's a yes or no question.
It's a yes or no, but it's actually never a yes or no. Never, if it's a yes or no, then you're gonna be like, it can never be that easy. Don't ever fall for that one. It's like yes, but
you could
no,
answer it.
But those burrotons,
yeah.
I mean those burrotons that they have in Hermosillo.
If you like, answer it in a Kentucky accent. Maybe that'll.
Oh my God. Well, I would say like anything in a flour tortilla that's rolled up is delicious. I don't know. Anything rolled up in a corn tortilla is delicious. They're friends. How big is the tortilla? What's that? Food's Gone Wild? The higher the socks, the downer the food.
Yeah.
The bigger the tortilla, the downer the food. Cabrón, no mames. So anyway, man, here's my dream. I wish there could be a big enough corn tortilla that would hold like a carne asada style burrito.
Yes.
That would be a beautiful thing. It just can't do it. It just can't do the work. That's why we need a flour tortilla. All right, but then a flour tortilla can be used for a taco, and I feel like sometimes the names they're kind of complicated. Like to find I don't know, like just the word taco. Was it the rolled up stick of dynamite? Is a taquito a taco? Is a taquito a flauta? I mean, it's like sometimes about the names. I feel like it's my students were the ones that called me out on this shit the other day. Like, Professor, you're thinking way too much about this.
No.
Like, never.
No, because that's what I do all day.
You see? You get it,
there's a difference between a Gen X and a Gen Z. Real quick, Steven, can I use the hashtag taco literacies even though I'm not in the class?
Of course. I wish you all would. Everybody.
Yeah. Everybody, do it.
I use it every day.
All right, everybody. Yeah.
At this point, Jose may have surpassed me in using it more. So join us all, everybody.
Let's make it big. Rodrigo, buenos dias, man. Or buenas tardes.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
I just want to make sure. Okay, fantastic. First of all, Dr. Steven, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you put in so much work, man. I'm definitely gonna. I always make it a point to make sure that we refer to our Chicanos and Chicanas that have put in that work to make sure that they get the respect that they deserve. So, Dr. Steven, thank you so much for being here. One of the reasons that I'm here with Isidro and Jose, and I support them 100%, is because they tackle these issues. There's so much I would love to talk about. I was in New York this past weekend, but it was more of a Dominican fest. I got introduced to Dominican food, and it's amazing, man. So
yeah. That's the first time I ever had Dominican food was when I moved to New York, and also Puerto Rican food and Colombian food, Ecuadorian food. That's when I started seeing like, hey, they have a tamal or a version of a tamal, and that was also kind of cool to have that kind of learning experience too.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. And in fact, so I just have two quick comments. One of them was regarding what you were talking about, how we do live in a white supremacist system, and at the end of the day, we are tackling and undoing these systems that have really encouraged us to battle it amongst ourselves. And I saw that this weekend when I was in New York, when I went to a Dominican restaurant, and it was pretty obvious to everybody that I was the only non-Dominican there. And I saw the cultural gatekeeping firsthand. And I kind of, I was at the beginning, I was like, kind of like, well, I'm Latino, why they treating me like this? But these are things that they learn, what I'm saying? They've seen white people take their things, what I'm saying? And so there's like a natural response when there's somebody that's outside of their cultura coming in. You're like, well, what is their prerogative? What is their motive for being in my restaurant, And so I went to this place called El Crucero. It's there on the Bronx on 138th. And then I went to another Mexican joint called Chisme, right there on 138th as well. And I was able to see that kind of cultural divide because in this Mexican restaurant, I got some tacos, a chicharrón preparado. Everybody welcomed me. As soon as they heard me speak, they're like, ¿de dónde vienes? You know, all these questions, right? And like you were saying, Steven, and this is my second point, I think that's the beauty of it, that when you, like, for example, when you walk into a restaurant, you might be the only Mexicano there. You might be the only Chicano there. You want to know that there's other people present, not just for your own self, but also to let everybody else know that, like, you know what, this food is not prepared by just some unknown person. It's prepared by people like me. And I always make it a point that if I hear a corrido in the background, if my guy that's serving the food, le traba las palabras en el inglés, I immediately switch over to Spanish. Even if he's Ecuadorian, man, they love a Latino being in a restaurant.
Right.
And I just wanted to appreciate you because you bring those stories out right now when you were talking about that and how important it is for us to be unified when it comes to being the only ones in that system. So thank you so much.
That's great. I really appreciate the way you put that. On one hand, there's a couple things there, man. One hand is like, you're right. When you're in those white spaces and the people are brown and you bring out some Spanish, man, you see the smile on their faces, which is always kind of cool. In those kind of like white spaces where it's mostly English, but you can bring in Spanish where people feel a bit more comfortable, but also, just a different relationship. That's kind of cool. Now, the stuff about like the racialization among Latinx groups, that's super complicated in New York. And that has to do with like skin presentation, colorism. Ultimately, though, I like the way you put it. It is learned behavior from white supremacy that divides us rather than unites us. And it moves the question away from like if it's Dominicans having problems with Mexicans, having problems with Puerto Ricans, having problems with Ecuadorians, and which does happen, especially in places where they've been segregated and fighting for resources. The question is never about who's on the top and who's dividing us or policy with the city. So it's a big distraction. But ultimately it is like the white supremacist group that racializes us, that teaches us, to be at each other rather than to work with one another. But there are those moments though, especially like after like a natural disaster or something like that, where we come out in force. In Texas, when all those people were having a hard time with stuff freezing, all those Mexican restaurants were feeding people when there's floods. This is the kind of thing that we do, And I feel like in the previous question was talking about like sometimes a sense of family on one side. And, it's not always for every Mexicanos, but we do have a traditional bigger sense that we're not just individuals, but a part of a group. Until we become more Americanized, then you'll be like taking your brother and sister to court.
That's really funny because I see my Anglo friends' parents sell their homes to their children or to their nieces and nephews. And the fuck I'd ever do that. I'd be like, no, here's the house. Right? That's just how things go.
So, one of the things that you highlighted, Stephen, in your response to Rodrigo, when you brought up the Texas example, and it goes around a lot. Jose and I have been trying to do this more and feature it. We call it the friendship economy. In that, an example that I saw my dad do with the taco truck is he used to have this little libreta, this little book. I call it a taco blockchain because he would write down the people who owed him money. When they said, hey, they didn't have money to pay, like, hey, okay, he never checked it. Like, he wasn't going to send Bruno to go pick up the tab and late payment notice. But what would happen was when some of these customers that later became friends, they were in trades, whether they were painters, whether they were construction, they would go and do construction or mow the lawn, or it's this bartering system, right? It's a friendship economy that you don't see in a lot of other cultures. I mean, you do see it by them selling you their house, but this friendship economy it's not a this for that. It's just this intrinsic kind of thing that happens. And that's what we need to see more of and highlight more of. Yeah?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that. I mean, I was thinking about that. I was like, my family did that all the time. Like, we pay back in something else. Usually my mom would send me to go clean somebody's yard. She'd be like, oh, yeah. Also, what Mexicans do, make your kids go work. But no, I mean, I do remember that, like having to trade for stuff. that was like, oh, you owe us some. My mom had loaned somebody some money, but the woman was able to do something, and we just kind of worked it. It was like that. It was
But
just,
you don't track it, right? You don't track it.
yeah.
You
I
just
mean,
it gets done.
it's hard to say what the level is. You have to kind of like, look, just paint this wall, and we'll call it even. We're like, okay, I guess that's even. Like, so somebody's getting the better of the deal probably, but it is cool though. That's kind of interesting, especially I don't know. I mean, like to be able to pay it and give somebody credit is a gesture on one hand, but also how you collect the repayment or try to put somebody in debt is a whole other gesture. And that's like I think the way about like how we can think about how we repay one another and how we show it like through respect. Because otherwise it gets rid of the respect and it's just I don't know, a transaction.
I do want to ask you about one in particular. His name was Marco, I believe, and he was a tough student. And then he invited you to a birthday party, and he introduced you as a. Do you remember that?
Buddy. Yeah, he's this guy. Oh man, So like I came to college, grad school. I wanted to do my PhD, but I wanted to study like some of the folks Jose was talking about, some of these literary folks like James Joyce, Samuel Beckett, Ezra Pound, these white guys. And at a certain point, I wanted to drop out of my PhD program because I was just like, it just wasn't for me. I realized like I'm going to write this dissertation and my parents aren't going to be able to read it. What's the point? What am I want to be competing with people who don't look like me? It was just getting very white the further I got up. So I found this after school program, and it was really cool because the kids, they were mixing English and Spanish. Like the poets I like were mixing languages too, but the kids were just doing it naturally, and it was beautiful. And then I was like, I can turn my research this way. So that's when I started working on research there at this place in Literacy. But I got to know the kids because I'd be helping them with their homework. This little kid, I have a bunch of nieces and nephews, and sometimes it's hard, man. Little kids be running around, they have too much caffeine, the chocolate all over the face or whatever, right?
We all could relate.
Like, hard time, man. This guy would just, you'd be helping him, he just get up and just walk away. Like, hey man, come back. He's like, hold on, I gotta ask my mom something. He take off, and like I haven't seen him trying to help the other kids. And anyway, and sometimes it was kind of hard. Like sometimes he would get mad and he would like hit his head on the table and stuff. And there was a lot of things going on with this young guy, And this was the place where, for me, I would talk to him and just ask him how he's doing. We would draw pictures together in color. And I was, one of the only adults I think who spoke to him like he knew on a first name basis. We're speaking English. And then I was asking him, telling him how cool his family is and how cool his mom is and everything, because I know how hard this one works. Anyway, so he invited me to his birthday party, me and a couple other mentors. We're the only people there. And the mom made some food for us. And then, he was just saying, like, you're my oldest best friend. You're my good friend. And I'm like, that's pretty cool, man. Like, it was kind of like one of these things where that part about being a mentor, I didn't realize how important it was because I had mentors, I guess, but most of my mentors were white women, to be honest, for my situation. And then for me, by virtue of just being Latino, Mexicano, Chicano, and like in relation to little kids, literally they look up to you because they're short. But there's a thing where like to be able to speak to an adult on a first name basis is a very powerful thing for a little kid. They have to take you serious. And this is sometimes the danger of like these kind of school programs where they do like community service. They send in the college students to like a library for a semester, and they get to have those relationships with children. But then when that semester's over, that kid doesn't get to see that person ever again. So usually to have a really successful mentorship program, you develop a kind of confianza, trust, but usually it takes a lot of time. And so I'm still in contact with these kids. That little guy, we're friends on Facebook, and he's taller than me.
That's so cool, man. That's an awesome story.
Kick some ass for me. Because now he can kick some ass on my behalf if I need to.
I know a guy. He'll take care of this.
Remember when I helped you with your homework, Gabriel? This is the cat.
What a wonderful story, man.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
I know we are coming towards the end.
So I do want to end, as always, on a positive note. Isidro?
Thank you very much. And thanks again, Steven, man. I'd like to extend this offer that you're welcome on the show anytime. A lot of the things that you've said are very powerful. And so we always want to have that type of influence on the show. So we also have this thing called a ta quote, right? Which is a quote, but with a little bit of a taco twist to it. And that's how we usually end the shows. Today's ta quote is, if at first you don't succeed, warm up another tortilla.
There it is. I like that. And like the heated tortilla, you too shall rise.
Yes.
He gets it.
Double
He
taco.
gets it.
Double taco. Like we gotta celebrate that. But once again, we want to thank you, Steven. Thank you so much for coming on, and you're always welcome here, man. You're always welcome here. Thank you for joining us, man. This has been really fun, and hasta la próxima.
Yeah.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Hasta luego.
On behalf of Jose Ralat and Dr. Steven Alvarez, I am the proud son of a taquero, and this is 10,000 Tacos.
Yo no sé cómo lo hace, baby, déjame ser el que te complace.